Husbands, you got to take responsibility for your family. You've got to take responsibility for instructing your children and discipling your household. And wives, you've got to give space for your husband to do this and encourage him and pray for him and help him in these endeavors. And we've got to be involved in our local churches. I don't know that gigantic, large scale mass churches, this big box store church model, is good. We're going to get caught up. We're going to get caught up. Hey, this is Eric with True Roots, back with another installment of the Common Man's Torah. And today we're going to be studying the Torah portion, Noach. This is Genesis chapter 6, verse 9 through Genesis 11, verse 32. Now, to bring us up into the context of where we are, at a very high level, we started ultimately in a place of creation at a very small level. We started in a garden with God, with a husband and a wife and some kids. And this was a very simple format. And what has occurred as the sin has trickled through man's bloodline down over the years is that the fullness of man's heart in the image of Adam has now begun to reach its end. And what I mean by its end is not its cessation or its termination point, but rather its fullness. If you think of it, later on, Paul says in the book of Romans that Christ is the end of the law for all them that believe. It's the goal or the destination point, like an end zone in football. And this is where we are in terms of flesh. And if you remember the last portion, and you can find that here, which was the very first portion, the underlying theme is mankind being faced with the question of whether or not God is good. And it's not just that whether or not he himself is good, but rather his ways, his intent, and the outcomes that come our way are good, even despite the fact that we might find ourselves in a challenging situation. And so this is kind of this continual battle. We've started at a low level, and now we've reached a mass point, and you're going to see that man unifies in this unholy unity of mankind in their flesh, and ultimately what occurs out of that is destruction. So go with me to Genesis chapter 6, starting in verse 5. It says, "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart." This is a central theme that's going to follow us all the way through the scriptures. Is God good? Are his ways good? And you're going to see this contrast of the results of man's heart, which is his flesh. That's the wide path that Yeshua talks about in the New Testament. And we're also going to see then this narrow path, which is the Lord's ways, and that leads to life. But it's not popular. So if I skip down to verse 11, it says that the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end, or the completion, or the fullness of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Now, you know the rest of the story. I'm not going to go into the details of Noah and the ark and the animals, which is, it's an amazing story, and there's lots of really good and interesting studies on that. And I personally believe that Ron Wyatt actually found the ark in Turkey, and there's a really good ministry that you can look into these discoveries. I'll try to put a link up here, and I encourage you to check that out because the evidence is actually there. But we're focusing now on the progression of man's heart. Man's heart ultimately leads himself to destroy himself and to what's wild is that he even thinks that he's prospering his life in the process. And what we see is that apart from the wisdom of God, we profess ourselves wise and we become fools in this process. And so if you look at Proverbs 14, starting in verse 8, it says that the wisdom of the prudent is to understand his way, but the folly of fools is deceit. It's a lie. Fools make a mock at sin, but among the righteous there is favor. The heart knows his own bitterness, and even a stranger does not intermeddle with his joy. The house of the wicked shall be overthrown, but the tabernacle of the upright shall flourish. There is a way which seems right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. So, this is really where we find ourselves today. We're on the backside of a presidential election here in America where there was an extreme contrast of worldviews. One side, although it's not perfect, is attempting to return to Christian values and the Christian foundation that our nation has been built upon, and the other side is trying to continually progress unhooked from any form of foundation or righteousness or truth. And it's this ever-changing, malleable process that there's nothing firm to stand upon. It's always changing. And this process leads to destruction. And this is exactly where they were in Noah's day, right before the flood. And ultimately, you're going to see very early on after the flood, they go right back to that. This is the progression that man finds themselves. And this is where we are today, that we've got a complete departure from the garden. You've got this massive, unholy unity of centralized power that is going to tell everybody else exactly what to do and how to live. And if you're not going to go along with that, then you're going to be persecuted and ultimately driven out from society. But this departure it's a departure from the original intent, which is the Father's foundation for society. God's foundation for society is a family. It's a father, it's a mother, it's some kids, and they're working with God at the center, who's holding them together and guiding them in his wisdom. Let's look at Romans chapter 1. You see this process. Starting in verse 18, Paul says that, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, us, even his internal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their foolish imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened." This is the inevitable process. And this is what we see from much of our society, specifically the left, that their hearts are darkened. Verse 22, "Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things." Ultimately, because we're inclined to worship something, and this is the direction, even though right now this leftist progressive path that they're on is primarily atheistic, it's going to lead to a worship of something, because we were created to worship something. "Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which was against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet, or which was due. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. They take pleasure in these things. In fact, they take pride in these things and in things that are actually destroying them, destroying their families, destroying their seed. There is the path of progressivism leads to a lack of children. It leads to a lack of reproduction, and that ultimately is a sure sign that you're under curse. And what's so sad about this is that when we go down this road of the evil heart of our flesh, this sinful nature, we actually are imprisoning ourselves while at the same time taking those things that we're imprisoning ourselves and championing them as freedom. So it's a complete inversion of all that which is good and righteous and life-giving and peace-giving and life-giving more abundantly, as Yeshua said that he came to give us life and give it, let us, that we might have life and have it more abundantly. It's the complete inversion of that. But the sad part about this is that we think that we're doing ourselves good in the process of destroying ourselves, and it's heartbreaking. This is the unholy unity of man. And this, we see this also, if I go back to Genesis, back to our Torah portion, in Genesis chapter 11, starting in verse 1, it says, "And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to one another, Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and they had slime for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men did builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down there and confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build that city. Therefore the name of it is called Babel." This is the essence of Babylon. It's an unholy unity of man's flesh, where it is not unified in truth, but rather rebellion against God. And that is the direction that we're headed if we don't see revival in our country. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves is what do we do? How do we respond? Well, I believe it's getting back to that original design that the Lord has given to us as an example in our last Torah portion. It's the family. The family's got to be restored. Large scale anything has never proven itself in the scriptures and throughout history to be creative of good things in the earth. Ultimately, centralized power leads to destruction. It leads to tyranny. It leads to slavery. And so we've got to fix things at a small, localized level. That means families. Husbands, you got to take responsibility for your family. You've got to take responsibility for instructing your children and discipling your household. And wives, you've got to give space for your husband to do this and encourage him and pray for him and help him in these endeavors. And we've got to be involved in our local churches. I don't know that gigantic, large scale mass churches, this big box store church model, is good. It's just not proving itself, from my standpoint, to be in the plan of God. It's destructive. It's too much power and too much temptation for one man. And so decentralized, small scale local fellowships working alongside in the harvest with people that they actually know, that we're close with, small scale stuff. I believe that that's the model. I believe when we get into very large scaled systems, we're leaning towards that Babylonian system. And ultimately, it leads to confusion, which is what Babel means. And it leads to tyranny. It leads to that the system itself has to be preserved. And it's not people oriented, which is what everything in the scriptures are about. This is about people. And it becomes more about the system or the organization or whatever that may be. And so this, I hope, is an encouragement to you to focus on the local level. These things, don't overcomplicate this stuff. Make it about dinner, having family dinners, having family devotions every single day. That's something that we do in my household. We call it family Bible time. And our kids know when it's family Bible time, it's devotion time. We're sitting down and we're instructing our children in the way in which they ought to go. Husbands, fathers, you've got to take responsibility of this. This is what God expects from you, because if there's a void of power, something is going to move in. Power doesn't just dissipate. If there's a void of authority, something is going to move in and take authority over your home. And that's not what God designed for us. Okay. So we can look back to our last portion and see that the family, when the family bit into that metaphorical fruit, and I'm not saying it was a metaphor, but in the case that I'm using it now, that God is not good and his ways are not good and his design is not good, where does it lead? It leads to Babylon. It leads to the unholy unity of man rebelling against God. So this is, I hope, an encouragement. Look, God saved the world with a man and his wife and their kids. There's a lesson there. It started with a man and his wife and his kids. And God saved the world from judgment with a man and his wife and his kids. What do you think God's going to save your community with? What do you think God's going to save this country with if he's going to save this country? We've got to make we've got to make ourselves available. We've got to be involved at the local level. Get involved in local things that are going on, whatever that may be. This is what the Lord is showing us through these examples. It's about family. So I hope this has been encouraging to you. I hope it has been an exhortation to you. Hey, I'm Eric with True Roots. This has been the Common Man's Torah. I hope you come back. We'll be uploading the next portion here soon, and hopefully we can get it up in time. All right, thanks and come again. Bye.